Mandla, the title of today's episode is about leading through crisis and uncertainty. Do you think the business world has become more unpredictable?
Yes, Amanda. Yeah, thanks for starting with that question. Yeah, life has always been complicated, but the key difference is that it is now more complex. And I just want to separate between those words. Complicated means that there's a lot of intricacies that one has to deal with, but a more complex world is a world where the variables are just a lot more. There's a lot more permutations that you have to deal with within business. Business is changing quicker. I remember in 1998, I read a Penguin book called Who Moved My Cheese, and it was shared with me by the CEO of the company that I was working for. And it was at that time where we had a first major change within our business. And the book Who Moved My Cheese is really about four characters that live in a maze. And the cheese is a metaphor for things that they need to live, things that will nourish them. And when the cheese was moved, these four characters reacted quite differently. Some quickly moved out and were able to find where the new location of the cheese was. And one of the characters was paralyzed and didn't quite know what to do since the cheese wasn't where it had always been. And I think that's such a powerful metaphor for today's world. I think there's a lot more cheese moving around that we need to chase than ever before.
Yes, what used to work is not working for many people anymore. So they need to find new ways to find their cheese. I like that idea. What does it feel like to be a leader that is navigating through crisis and uncertainty?
It can feel like you're steering a ship through a severe storm with big waves and the wind howling, and sailors are looking for guidance because they don't know how they'll survive the crisis. So often leaders can feel overwhelmed and battered from various sides. And the challenge of being a leader is that as you go higher and higher up the ranks of leadership, the number of forces that are coming at you or against you increases. So a leader that is navigating crisis and uncertainty typically has to deal with many scenarios, many options that have no certain outcome. And what can make it worse is that they have limited resources to reduce the uncertainty of every scenario to an acceptable level. And I do find that with all the various companies and organizations that I'm involved in, resources are limited, but the goals that we're seeking to achieve are just as high, if not higher than they were before. So you're doing a lot more with a lot less. But that's not altogether a bad thing. If you succeed in doing more with less in an uncertain world, you can become a really competitive company.
And if you're an outsider looking in, what does a poorly managed crisis look like?
People have a fight or flight response or freeze scenario. And where organizations and leaders are not responding, you find that people tend to freeze. They don't respond quickly to an issue that's rapidly emerging. And you might find that because of that, there's poor communication in terms of how to adapt to this new crisis that we may be facing. And also not judging the severity of the crisis. I remember many years ago, one of the big oil companies had an oil spill just outside the Americas, and it seemed like whatever they tried to do, this oil spill got worse and worse, and it caused huge environmental damage. And that's where a company gets stuck in a domino effect. One tiny thing leads to another, and suddenly you're dealing with multiple crises that started from one issue. So it's really about acting very quickly.
What strategies can you use to make quick but informed decisions during a crisis?
You need to firstly populate what your alternatives are. I like to get a paper out and try and have at least three, four, five options which could resolve whatever the issue is. And with each of those options, you need to plan scenarios. What is the likelihood of each of those scenarios working? What could be a risk that each scenario has? What consequences would you accept if you embark on a particular scenario? And what are the benefits of each scenario? So it's really around examining multiple scenarios and very quickly making a decision to take one particular option.
So, what would be examples of the practical tools and techniques that leaders can use to manage uncertainty?
In my experiences, three key techniques. One of them is collaboration and project management. How do you get everyone to rally together around dealing with this issue that has emerged? And secondly, data analysis and financial modeling. So in organizations, we deal with a lot of data, and it's important to dig deep into that data because that will help you come up with new models for managing a particular issue. And lastly, you need to measure your risk. Don't just say the risk my cheese moving is 1 out of 3, but actually work out what would be the impact. What would you lose if your cheese moved that you are chasing in terms of dollars and cents?
Okay, so knowing that, how do you create a plan that is agile and flexible?
So the opposite of that is a plan that is rigid. You find that you commit a lot of resources into it, meaning there's no turning back once you've started implementing that plan. So it's about being light on your feet, not committing your whole team's resources to just one particular plan, but creating areas where you can pivot if something is not working out. And using some of the tools that I mentioned earlier, such as modeling multiple scenarios, so that as soon as you realize that something is not working, you can quickly jump to another plan.
Okay, so as we close, what is your encouragement of the day from your book, Conquer Your Mountains?
Week 32 is entitled Nahum and Habakkuk, Give Me Clean Hands. I find that often when we navigate crisis, we accumulate damage, and it's important to stop and self-repair. So this extract of the book says, "The scars on my body are barely visible, but soul scars run deep. Scars of hate, betrayal, neglect, failure, and so on. The scar tissue we accumulate can hinder us from moving effectively."
That's so true. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amanda de Wet, and I'm the Senior Editor at Luca, the Faith and Inspiration imprint of Penguin Random House, South Africa.
And I'm Mandla, the author of an inspirational book called Conquer Your Mountains, as well as a science fiction book called The Fallen Angel.